Tonight we're doing the first half of our 2-event series called Redefining Inequality. We're discussing poverty on both a local and a global scale here at St. Thomas in the Honors Program, trying to put our heads together and figure out what does it actually mean for people who are young people. Like, people tell us all the time in college, like, it's this age, like, we're the ones who have the potential to really make a change in the next generation, in the coming years, and how do we really make a positive impact in our world when we see so much suffering around us in the poor. To begin, I have a quote from Pope Francis. He says that it's important that we know a poverty that is learned with the humble, the poor, the sick, and all those who are on the peripheries of life. Theoretical poverty is of no use to us. Poverty is learned by touching the flesh of the poor Christ, in the humble, the poor, the sick, and in children. And his point is that we can talk all we want, but when it comes down to it, we need people who are willing to go out and act, who are willing to get their hands dirty and make a real impact on their communities by doing things, by really engaging instead of wishing that things were different. And that's what we're all about tonight. So we have 5 young people who are here with us that are going to give their insight and their perspectives on this issue of poverty. We've got a lot of different perspectives that are going to be coming tonight, and hopefully this will be an edifying time and a time that will encourage all of us to maybe make one more step in a positive direction to make a real change in the world, and that it would give us hope that we actually can make an impact. So I'm going to invite up our first presenter, that's Haley, and she's going to talk a little bit about,
I'll give it all. Okay, do you want me to shut the door?
Sure, yeah. And if you could just, for all the presenters, if you could just stand there for the recordings so that I can get you on camera.
Okay. I'll just tell you when to start it. I'm going to keep you on the edge of your seat, see when I'm going to start the video. My name is Haley. I am actually transferred here this semester, and I actually went to school in Chicago, which is kind of where I did the volunteer work that really touched me. And living in Chicago, you are not a stranger to poverty. You see it on the train, you see it on the corners, you see it in front of the buildings, and a lot of times you just kind of walk past when you're on Madison Avenue. You're just walking past because you're shopping, and you try and pretend that you don't see those people who are struggling because it's uncomfortable. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with poverty and uncomfortable with homelessness, and I was one of those people. But I got to the point where I was tired of feeling so uncomfortable, tired of not doing anything. So I started to look for an organization where I would be able to volunteer for and feel like I was actually doing something. And that's when I stumbled across LIFT. LIFT is a national organization that has offices in a couple cities throughout the United States, mostly East Coast, and then you have LA and Chicago. And they do something I think that is really, really special and really incredible. What they do is they partner community members who are struggling with poverty with staff members who are on a volunteer basis, and they come in and they team together and they meet one-on-one and work toward achieving that community member's goal. And that's what I did. I worked as a volunteer staff member, and I worked with a couple clients a week, and these people were homeless, they didn't have jobs, they were living in shelters, or they were looking for health care or child care services, or what kind of public benefits that they would qualify for. And all the staff members would receive kind of extensive training on the housing situation in Chicago. So you would learn about shelters, single room occupancies, you would learn, how can you get into Section 9 housing or government housing, what kind of person will qualify for marketplace rent apartments. And then you would also learn about the public benefits system. Who would qualify for what? How do they apply? How do they get it? What are all these different things that people can apply for? And then you also learn how to get people jobs. You look at resumes. What kind of jobs do people want? How can you spin a story to make it sound good on a resume? So you did all these incredible things with these people. And it was such a different experience because you're not walking past these people on the street anymore. You're sitting next to them in an office in front of a computer, and they're telling you their life story. And you don't get that. You don't see them as people a lot of times. But when you're sitting there with them, that's all they are. They're individuals, they're people, they have stories, and they want to share those stories with you. But what's interesting about Lyft is that it doesn't offer any services on its own. What it does is mainly a referral system to other organizations that are working in the area, like job training programs, or like people who are throwing like clothing drives, and you can tell people where they can go to get the things that they need. And throughout my experience at Lyft, there were a lot of realities that I learned. One of those was that the public benefit system is so difficult to navigate. Even for someone with me who had training, who had supervisors, and I could go and be like, okay, this is a situation, what should I do? How can I get them the help that they need? I can't even imagine being homeless and trying to get the things that you need, because you don't have access to a computer a lot of times. So you can't look up, what kind of benefits you would apply for that you could get, and that's just one of the many problems. And one of the things that I really learned that I think speaks a lot about how complicated the system is for people who are struggling with poverty is that in the city of Chicago, you have to register with the government as a homeless individual and to be able to stay at a homeless shelter overnight. You can't just show up and say that you're homeless. You have to have a piece of paper that says that you are homeless and that you are able to stay in the shelter. And even then, there's no guarantees that you get to stay there, since there are a lot of qualifications and a lot of people, and they fill up really quickly. And that was what the first thing that I was just completely blindsided by, is just how crazy that whole idea is. But I think that the most special thing that I experienced was that when you're sitting down with an individual and they're telling you their life story, and you can see their faces light up, and that they're so excited that they get to talk to someone. They don't feel ignored, they don't feel like they're less than anyone else, and they have someone sitting by their side, listening to them, getting to know them, and treating them with dignity, respect, and an open mind. Because a lot of those people don't receive that on a daily basis, and coming to Lyft for them is such an experience because they get to meet with someone who actually cares about their welfare and what they're doing. And Lyft is an incredible organization that is working to help families secure the essential personal, financial, and social foundations that they need to get ahead, to get above the poverty line, and be able to give themselves and their children the future that they need to survive. And they do this by working with the individual, not for them, not doing things for them, so that these people can actually achieve what they want to achieve by their own merit, by their own hard work. And that's such an incredible feeling for them, because you're not doing it for them. They're doing it for themselves, and that gives them such a sense of independence and gratitude that really helps keep them above the poverty line in a way that nothing else really can. And before I show you the video, which I think is really special and was what first attracted me working at Lyft, was some kind of statistics about what that Lyft actually does work, and that it is an effective program. And about 80% of Lyft clients who come in who do not have a job get a job interview. And that's really special, because a lot of times they'll bring in these resumes and they don't make any sense. They're, because a lot of us are like, okay, we go onto Word and then we get the format and then you just kind of put things in, but they don't have that and they don't know what you put on a resume. So kind of going through that with them, that is one step. But then you can also give them the clothes that they need to go to the interview, because a lot of times people are going to take one look at them and not going to hire them. So they have to have a lot of things in place for them to even get the job interview, let alone getting the job. But since 1998, Lyft has worked with nearly 100,000 people across the United States, and those people have committed themselves to lifting themselves out of poverty for good. And last year alone, Lyft helped members generate $6 million in wages and $2 million in public benefits. So that it is a program that really does work, it is effective, and it really works on a personal, one-to-one basis. So I'm going to start the video. And this video is it takes place in the Chicago office, which is where I worked, and it talks a lot about just the community members' experiences at Lyft.
I had my own property management firm that specialized in finding housing for low-income people. That project failed. The company went out of business. Separated from my wife. I had about 4 or 5 properties, and because of the real estate situation, I lost all of those properties.
I came out in 2002 from being incarcerated for 6 years. Because at the beginning, I was going through all this training, I wanted to be a police officer for Chicago Housing. Unfortunately, I can't be that anymore because of my background.
I used to be fine. I used to work in New York and everything was fine. I have a sister here and she told me that the things are better here, but when I came in, I'm like, my goodness. And I came in the first I cry and then like depressed, thinking all my problems. Because no job, 5 years old boy I have.
Sleeping at night is not that easy, you know. And then you wake up and the reality is there, you know.
There's so many stereotypes that come along with, people that happen to be in a less fortunate situation than all of us. A lot of your other organizations they've been to, they just kind of talk to them that like they're a blank wall. They really don't care about what they really need, their feelings, their aspirations, and
people are more likely to have find persistence in employment and in housing if they feel supported versus when they feel isolated. And so we try to help them get that community support as well. So we do that through the relationship with our volunteers and clients form with each other, and then also what we call the internal toolkit. That's sort of like the qualities that we all have inside us that help us go through tough situations. That kind of voice that helps you say, I've been through something tough before, so I know that I can make it through this.
It was the hardest part of my life when I first started coming here. I was used to success, and defeat kind of slapped me in the face. You lose your family, you lose your job, and your health goes bad all in a 6-month period. You get kind of disoriented. I was extremely vulnerable when I first came in. She listened to me, she made me cry, she made me smile. But at the end of the day, she gave me encouragement to get up out of that hole that I was in. And I'm always ready to cry thinking about it. It was hard. But she helped me through it. Things have got better.
I put out many resumes, but every time I went in for the job interview and for the assessment test, they were like, yeah, we're really interested in having you work for us. And they said they would call me, but every time they would call me, it would be like, I'm sorry. I came here and I talked to Margot, and Margot said, well, we can't just give up. It doesn't matter, we can still try. So we started doing that.
You feel like sometimes like I'm the one who have problems, but when you go there, you feel like, oh, I'm somebody special here, you know what I mean?
And I feel like when people come in, they're genuinely happy because the lift advocates treat them as people. And I feel like that's not a thing that they feel most of the time, and they don't get to have real conversation with a lot of people, and they can't really get to experience like how it is to be like, in a better situation. Lift grants something that should have always been there to begin with.
What we do is we partner volunteers, most of them are college students, but volunteers from all over, to work one-on-one with low-income community members and help them develop an individualized goal plan to chart their path to whatever state of well-being and economic stability they want to achieve.
So you can feel, as if your brother and brother relationship, helping one another. It's like a home for me. The Lift office is like a home for me.
Okay, so I first saw that video and I was like, I have to do this, I have to be a part of this. I just felt like it was such an incredible opportunity, and it was. So obviously working with one person at a time isn't going to end poverty. That's not realistic, but I think that there should be people working on both a global and structural scale, but there should also be people working with one individual, one family, one city at a time, because sitting down with these people and when they get a job interview or when they get a job or when we find a housing, that's just such a feeling, there's just a feeling there's nothing else like that, because you're really changing someone else's life for a better in a way that you can't completely understand, but in a way for them that completely changes everything and gives them such a feeling of hope. And that's what I learned at Lift, is that these people are individuals and we have to treat them like it, otherwise, nothing else is going to change, because they are people and they have a story and they want to tell it just like you and I. And I feel like Lift is a place where they get to tell their story and they get to alleviate themselves of poverty by their own hard work and their own merit. So, thank you.
Anybody has questions?
Yes.
Do they have a lift program in the cities?
I wish. That would be wonderful, but they don't. I think they would really benefit from it. But it is an AmeriCorps program, so hopefully they will open an office. But yeah, it's like Boston, New York, LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, I think. Anything else? Yes.
What made you decide to get involved with Lyft, or like
Oh.
anything in general? Like, why did you want to do that kind of work?
I think that first of all is like I'm from local here, and when moving to Chicago, that was such a climate change, such a difference, and seeing that poverty, that desperation, that hunger for a better life, I feel like that just impacted me in a way that I couldn't just pretend that it wasn't there. I couldn't just give leftovers to homeless people and feel good about myself. I had to do something more, and I think that there are so many programs to get involved in, but seeing that video and like knowing that I could do something for one person, just one person would be enough for me, and that was like such a personal connection that I had to do it.
Okay. Guys? Had a PowerPoint at some time.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, come. Here, Caitlin. Come.
Okay, and you can have the mouse so that you can
Oh,
control it. I know,
solid.
very generous.
All right. So, if you don't know me, I'm Sam Burrows, sophomore here. I'm in the honors program somehow. We'll see how long that lasts, right? Hello guys, how you doing?
Hi. Are we in the right place?
Are you for the symposium?
I don't know.
No, we're looking for a rabbi's presentation.
Oh,
Don't
around
think
the
that's
corner.
us.
It's around the corner. If you go back towards the elevators and take a right, there's an open door.
Okay, well, they told us to come here.
Is it in Wolf?
It might be,
Yeah,
there's
might be.
No, it's right.
Hey guys,
earlier.
Maybe have no space for.
that's that then. All right. So I wanted to do this because I come from a real sheltered background, as I think a lot of St. Thomas kids do. Maybe I don't know, the kids who I have met with are from the same grade school, the same high schools. I went to grade school in Minnetonka. I went to high school in Chanhassen. Not the most diverse crowd by any means, and it doesn't really change when you come here for the most part. So I want to realize that a lot of times when you think poverty, there's a kid from Africa on the last slide, and it's like the classic, right? Cue Sarah McLaughlin, classic. Thank you, Sarah. Classic, like impoverished, and just because we're not in that setting, or just because we're not in Haley's scenario in Chicago, doesn't mean there's not impoverished people around us in other ways. And then realizing that we might have gifts to suit those people, which is especially important when you're in college and don't have any money, such as myself, to donate. So, that'll do it. Okay. So around here, you might see the guy on the side of the road. So I realized that when you see those kind of people, that's what we interact with as far as poverty. You want to help, and the natural reaction is to want to help. So you go on mission trips, right? It's safe. You don't have to see anyone. You just go build a house. It's not Justin Bieber on the left. That is me in Kokomo, Indiana. And we're building a bathroom in a school because they didn't have bathrooms. And then we left, and it lasted a week, and it was great. Feed My Starving Children, classic. Everyone's been to Feed My Starving Children. Everyone's worn the hairnets. Everyone's probably tasted it at the end and hated it just as much. Yeah, I mean, Feed My Starving Children is great. It's not my ideal service solely because we've made it a science to pull the emotional connection out of serving people. You see a picture in the beginning, they maybe give you a name, and then you go and you scoop your butt off for an hour, and you fill these mana packs, and then you send them, and they tell you, great job, taste them, and you go home. No emotional connection. It's the epitome of efficiency as far as service. But I mean, I felt like I was just lacking something in the service, and you're not really in contact with poverty at all. So what do you see here? Bunch of happy old people, right? They're, if you look up, this is a nursing home down the street, Crandall Lake. If you look at the median, amount for how much they pay a year in across the U.S. as far as nursing homes go, it's $73K a year for a semi-private room, which is a room divided by a curtain with someone else. That's $200 a day. If you want a private room, it's $222 a day. That was the median. Those are 2012 statistics, probably gone up. So they're clearly not in financial poverty. They have money, but at the same time, there's still a need there. And if you take the time to realize that the need that they are lacking, covered by Mother Teresa, we think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, homeless. But the poverty of being unwanted, unloved, uncared is the greatest poverty. Technically, or theoretically, Mother Teresa is saying is perhaps they're in more poverty than the people that go under. Because feeling like you're unloved can be more powerful as a person. And recognizing that need and recognizing how you can help meet that need is something that we're all called to do. Right? So we're called to make relationships. That's what I felt like I was missing a few of my starving children. Relationships are hard, they're awkward. You don't want to go up and talk to someone that's asking for money. It's just awkward. I know. I've done it. But realizing that a lot of times you can't just throw money at problems, because money can help, but relationships, human interaction, showing that you care is what heals, right? So using that, I realized, what can I contribute, right? I play shows on the weekends. That's how I make money. That's how I pay for my tuition. We play in bars, and it's just how I pay for school. So what I decided is that can be an avenue that I can use to contribute to that need, to meet that need, right? So I put together a student-driven organization here of student musicians. And most of them are student musicians. Some of them just wanted to go and visit. But we went, and this is at Christmas, hence the real hip sweater that I'm wearing. It was warm, to say the least. And we went, and it was funny because that's another group that we brought with. That was when you say Christmas carols, and then you can see them in the background. And you'd expect it to be less awkward. No less awkward. It's just like you go and you're expecting this like overwhelming sense of, oh, look at how hard I tried, and it's paying back. And you do it, and it's just awkward. And people are kind of in and out, and some people are falling asleep, and it kind of smells, and it's like, and then you realize you're not doing it for yourself. Like, you're not going in here thinking, oh, why don't I come back so satisfied, and so I can be so changed and feel good about my week. You're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it because it's an exchange of gifts. We're giving gifts, whether it's music, whether it's, you guys are honor students, like you guys are all geniuses. And we're giving these gifts, and then we're giving them to share. It's an exchange of gifts. You should give through what you have as a person to contribute to your local community. It's the idea that every gift or talent that we have the subsequent responsibility to share that gift or talent with the people in our local community that could benefit most from it, right? And recognizing that you can do that. And it's not easy, and it's not fun some of the time. But every once in a while you talk to Steve in the corner, and Steve's a World War II vet, and he told you 3 stories that blew my mind about things overseas. And it's like, this is something that he's going to talk to his buddies about, meeting some random flannel-shirted, untucked college student that tried to get through a Christmas carol and talk to him once on a Tuesday over lunch, and he's going to be able to tell his friends about that. Because they don't have the same relationships and the same human interaction that we have on campus around 10,000 people every day, right? So we're all here. We all have a really good education. Last time I looked, it was 33.8 126 people in the U.S. that graduate with a bachelor's degree. You guys are clearly going to graduate, right? If you're honor students. So much will be required of the person entrusted with much. Still more will be demanded of the person entrusted with more, right? So not only do you guys have much, but you have more is the idea, and you're called to give more because you have more to give. So I realized, why stop at old people? Why stop at elderly care facilities is, I suppose, a better way of phrasing that. So I went down and I realized I'm getting a good education here at St. Thomas. So how can I contribute that? I'm an HR major. I like people. I like interviewing. One of the things I realized is that I've been taught how to interview people, or at least think I can. But so regardless, I've been taught enough that I have enough to share. So I went down to Goodwill Easter Seals. I found a local place there, actually headquartered on University and Pryor. And you can go in there and you can volunteer once a month, and you help mentor convicted felons on business etiquette, interview strategy. You're revising resumes. You're just helping them with general business knowledge and how to interview better. Because a lot of times they're not in the same communities that we are. They're not the same demographic where they're coming in and saying, I'm worried which internship I should book first, or like, oh, I only have a 397, right? And instead they're talking about, oh, I have been arrested twice. I have 2 felonies because of opiates and 1 because of something else, like 1 because of manslaughter. Like, you're dealing with a completely different demographic, and you have to help them because they don't have the business knowledge, and you can use what you've given to help them phrase, or to give them an opportunity is what you're doing. And like I said, I went down there and it's so intimidating. They are twice my age. And the guy that I interviewed with last Thursday, he had skull tattoos, and I am 5'10", and he was huge. And I was intimidated, and I mean, like, I realized, like, yeah, it's gonna not be fun. But then again, you're brought back to that idea that it's really not about you. You're not there because you want to have the most satisfying, I was changed, look at my sweet mission trip, kind of glamorous experience. It's the kind of just consistent, small effort to show people that you care. However way you can do that with what gifts you were given, right? So gift of self is what I eventually came to the conclusion about. So I would challenge all you guys to assess yourself, assess what you've been given, assess the gifts that you've been given, and then see where you can use those to meet the needs of your local community. And then also realize that a lot of times you can't throw money on an issue. A lot of times you just have to show that you care, and you have to show that you have things that you can help people with that they're lacking. I think that's the last one, right? Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys.
Any questions for someone? Okay.
I'm Michaela, and one way I encountered the poor was on a mission trip to Guatemala the summer after my senior year in high school, which was the summer of 2011. The most impactful aspect of this mission trip was how we encountered the poor in Guatemala. In Guatemala, the poor taught us how to help them. We weren't there to blaze a path ahead of them or to just dump a bunch of resources on top of them. We were there to use our hands, our feet, and our skills to just help their efforts that they were initiating. So a little bit about Guatemala. The mission we went to was the San Lucas mission. It's on Lake Atitlan, and it was founded in 1584 by Franciscans. But it really started to flourish after Father Greg Schaefer became pastor of the mission in 1962. And he's actually from New Ulm Diocese in Minnesota. So there's a little kind of home connection there as well. Each summer, my home parish sends about 20 youth and adult chaperones to this mission because of a stove project connection there. So after Father Greg went there, he noticed that these people needed a lot of things: housing, healthcare, education, and land. And these 4 things not only address the immediate effects of poverty, but they also address the root causes. For example, like with the land, in most of Guatemala, it's coffee plantations. So without an education and without land, the primarily Mayan people there are forced to work on these plantations. But if this mission can obtain them land and education, then they can work for themselves and then earn a more decent profit and be able to more flourish on their own. And then the housing and healthcare are more addressing the immediate effects of their poverty so that they can have better living conditions. The mission is largely based off of the preferential option for the poor and Christian social teaching. In short, preferential option for the poor is a phrase from Vatican II that addresses how we treat the poor in our communities. Are they given the preference of like excess resources we have? And then Christian social teaching is based off kind of the 4 pillars of the dignity of the human person, solidarity, subsidiarity, and the common good. The dignity of the human person is essentially fundamental to the other 3 because it shows how life is sacred. And then the common good recognizes how each person has a responsibility to contribute to the common good, and each person has something to offer to that. Solidarity is along the lines of walking with the poor and using what resources they have and kind of meeting them where they're at. And subsidiarity, which is very close to that, addresses the more meeting the poor where they are part instead of just kind of taking what you have and trying to fit it around them. And a big part of it is the Guanana coffee. So if you've ever heard of that before, that's kind of the name of their coffee production. So what did we do when we were there? Well, we wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, which almost always had tortillas and black beans, and we'd hop into the bed of a pickup truck, hold on to the railings for dear life, get dropped off at a site, and fill bags with dirt. So it's nothing very extravagant in the end. We weren't there really blazing a path ahead of them, doing something incredible. We spent probably hours at this little site filling bags with dirt for coffee plants. When we went there, it just happened to be after some mudslides which wiped out some of their coffee trees. So they needed all these bags of dirt so they could start growing some new coffee trees. Other things we did were, here's a picture of the garden where they started growing the coffee trees, and you can see the little wheelbarrow of our bags of dirt getting planted there. We also got to help with rebar, which is essentially getting the metal structures for concrete for buildings they were going to make. And then we also had the opportunity to work on the stove project. In Guatemala, especially some of their homes, the women will cook over these open fires, which is very hazardous to them, not only because the smoke will get trapped inside the house, but also because they'll usually be balancing a big pot on a rock, which sometimes falls off, and then you essentially have a mess and then the risk of getting burnt. So a project that is kind of associated with the mission is getting stoves with kind of ventilation shafts into these houses so that they can cook more safely. And it kind of goes along that with the filling bags with dirt and then building these stoves. Kind of goes along with meeting them where they're at. Usually we'd meet up with one of the workers there and he'd start the stove off. And you can see his tools aren't very complex. He has a tape measure, a level, some string, bricks, and a machete. He'd actually cut the bricks with a machete, not like a fancy brick cutting tool that we'd have here. So it was really a lot of just seeing how they did things, and then he'd show us how to use simple tools to accomplish one of these tasks instead. And Father Greg Schaefer, I think this quote kind of applies to this as well. It's listening to the poor too, because if we didn't listen to him, we wouldn't know how he needed to be helped. And Father Greg Schaefer came to Guatemala, and he didn't speak a word of Spanish and hardly knew anything about their culture at all. He was essentially just kind of brought into the situation providentially. And he says in retrospect that it was only until after I was able to appreciate and understand after about 3 years that I realized, well, maybe I can be of value because I've been forced to listen to the people, not because I wanted to or necessarily thought it was good, but because I had no other way. So he was willing to let the poor teach him how they needed help, and then helped them through what they needed. Another part of helping the poor too, I think, is seeing what they have to offer. This is a man I had the opportunity to meet. His name's Crisano, and he was born hard of hearing, which a lot of people didn't realize right away. They just thought he didn't like to pay attention in class and would just like to sit back and didn't really have much to offer. Well, someone noticed one day that he was hard of hearing, but they also noticed that he was really good at carving wood. So even though it may not have been the particular thing they were trying to teach him to offer to the community, they found what he could offer to the community, which was being an artisan in the area. Now, like in the places we visited, you could see that these people really don't have much materially. This is one of their bedrooms, very kind of almost austere, without much there. But what I noticed that they did have, though, was an appreciation for what they do have, that I noticed that previous to my trip to Guatemala, I lacked. And in my kind of reflection after going to Guatemala, I wrote this little reflection, and a portion of it is up there. So it's called In His Eyes. I'll come home to the place of everyday, and inevitably allow the currents of normality to pull at my ankles. Into the currents, I'll unpack the unfamiliar, from somewhere, someplace, sometime, where it is different. I'll unpack a story here, a gift there, a memory around the corner, watching as the waters roll and tumble and shift with every piece. Maybe I'll show you a picture of a young child standing along a damp brick road, a road lined by tin-roofed gray brick homes and a few plants. You'll see his t-shirt, jeans, worn shoes, and the soccer ball tucked under his arm. You'll see his messy hair and timid smile. But tell me, my friend, will you see his eyes? Can you imagine his eyes? The way they dance with joy between our faces and the soccer ball, the bountiful happiness unleashed through the company of a stranger and simplicity of a game. Can you imagine how his eyes see beyond? His eyes see beyond to the gift of companionship. He sees the treasure of a moment to share, the joy of laughter, the pleasure of a smile. Can you imagine him seeing every single blessing, every blessing I was once veiled from by ignorance, carelessness, and the busyness of productiveness? When I looked into his eyes, I saw thanksgiving for the gift of the day. I saw the welcoming of a stranger, patience, humbleness, strength, generosity, everything a man could hope for, flowing from his gaze, emerging from the gaze of a small child. If I could bring home anything, I would bring home his eyes. And maybe in a fashion, I did. Because now I notice the beauty of his simple gifts throughout the day, the joy of friendship, the ability to love one another, and giving thanks for what I have. And at the very least, my friend, when you look at the picture and into his eyes, tell me, will you be able to see how he is our brother? So kind of another story is before I went to Guatemala, one of the youth ministers there who had spent an extended time in Guatemala said that he simply just had him and some of the volunteers he was working with sit down and talk to the people they were working with for a while. Now he was with some engineers, and afterwards the engineers were like, we could have built stuff, we just wasted 2 hours, we could have done so much good for these people. And he's like, no. You did do the most important good you could have done, given these people, because you showed you cared about them. So, and I think that's something that some organizations have really come to grasp in our area, not just this mission. For example, Feed My Starving Children has recognized that they could have machines pack their food and get it done much more quickly by having machines get it assemble the meals. But instead they have a bunch of volunteers who spill food and sometimes dump it in the wrong order, come and assemble these. But they realize that there's that personal connection. Of course it's across a big giant ocean, but it's people doing the work instead of an anonymous machine. they also kind of gave us a similar experience when we visited Guatemala. And after kind of working at leveling some ground for a soccer field for a few hours, they just had us sit down with some of the women who were weaving and just talk to them for a while. And after speaking with this woman, her name was Amelia for a while, suddenly she asked me, "You're going to weave now." And I saw all the strings and it was like, there is no way I am weaving. But she just essentially plopped it into my lap and taught me how to weave a little bit. I wasn't very good at all, but essentially it's, if you take the chance, instead of going to a place to solve a problem, go to however you choose to try to help poverty in your, solve the problem of poverty in your area. Instead of solving the problem, help a person. And kind of like Amelia, they might just want to help you in return, even if it's just sharing, trying to teach you a little gift and joy that they have. So aside from that, what else can you do? Well, if you're kind of more curious about Guatemala, you can visit sanlucasmission.org or Google Friends of San Lucas, or just simply help those around you. Thank you.
Questions?
What's next for you?
For me?
Yeah, are you doing anything locally?
Not, well, I'm hoping to get involved with Compatible Technologies International once I get more engineering under my belt. I'm an engineering major, so it's kind of a work in progress at the moment.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah.
Would you ever want to go back to San Lucas?
Oh yeah. So they have an adult mission trip, but if I recall, it's during the school year, so eventually. And maybe with Vision, but I've had J-term classes. Thank you.
Michelle.
Yes.
Okay.
So I just press it when I want to.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for having me. My name is Kevin. I want to thank you for having me because I'm not a student here. I work here in the catering department. That's how I know Sarah. Those are my parents back there. They also work here. And I grew up in this neighborhood. I grew up on Ashland Avenue. So I grew up in St. Mark's Parish, went to St. Mark's School, Cretan-Durham Hall High School, went to college out of state, and now I'm back here doing some work. So I really appreciate being here, even though I'm not quite as ingrained into the community in the same way that you are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about immigration. I've done a lot of work with immigrants here in the United States and Latin American communities outside of the country. Sarah asked me to talk about it, and I had a lot of trouble figuring out what I was going to say. I think I realized that I know pretty intimately the struggles that immigrants go through and the struggles that people in poor areas of Latin America go through. I visited the US-Mexico border on a social justice delegation. I been to Nicaragua for 2-3 week periods to study inequalities and the influence that the US military and government has on the economy and the sort of like social situation down there. I also lived in a place called Casa Guadalupana, which is a Catholic worker house on the west side of St. Paul. I lived there for about 7 months, giving hospitality to immigrants without documents from Latin America who needed a place to stay for a while. And those were all super incredibly impactful experiences, but the big lesson that I got out of those experiences was that it's not the job of people like me to share the stories and share the struggles and speak for people that are coming from that situation. And here's some examples of why that's a problem. The media, as we know, is controlled in this country mostly by people like me, people who are white males from the upper classes, and the media often tries to speak for people from marginalized communities, and we sort of get this, basically. It's sort of a mess. We get total just like racism, as you see on the top. On the bottom, you see like, oh, these are just people to like, maybe not to be feared, but people that we should make fun of, and people that are just like, their purpose is for us to mock. And then we get stuff like this, which is like people who are sad and helpless and have no power, that need our help and our money and have no human agency of their own. So I have a quote. Does someone want to read the quote so it's not just me talking?
Sure.
Go.
If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
Has anyone heard this quote before? Great. So what do you think it means? What does it mean to you?
To me, oh, if you're helping someone, it's kind of condescending, right? You're gonna say, oh, don't worry, I'll come and help you. You're kind of saying, because I'm at a higher point and I can step down and help you. But if you're gonna say we can work together, you're helping them at where they're at right then.
Any other ideas from other people?
Sort of the idea that we're not free unless we're all free.
Yes. Cool. Thank you. Does anyone know who said this quote?
I feel like she was an Aboriginal activist.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
So
So I don't know her name either, to be honest. I
Yeah.
knew it at one point, but I forgot. It was an Aboriginal activist who, at a time, was leading a movement to get more land for Indigenous people in Australia. There was a lot of white people from Europe and from the United States coming to Australia and saying they want to help, they want to help, they want to help. And this woman was basically saying, no, we don't need your help. We need you to work with us, alongside of us. We need you to see that your interests and your liberation is the same as our interests and our liberation. So this is sort of part of my journey into social justice work. I should say that now I work at a place called Waite House Neighborhood Center in the Phillips neighborhood. It's a large neighborhood center that doesn't operate off of a traditional social service model. It operates on more of a community empowerment model. So most people who work there, it's pretty rare that I'm working there as a white person and someone who's not from the neighborhood. It's mostly Latinos and African Americans and Native Americans who are working there because that's what the neighborhood is, and it's important for the organization to reflect a staff of people whose liberation is all bound up together. It took me a while to realize that. I went to San Lucas as well. I've been there twice. I went there in high school once and in college also. And I think when I had that experience, it was sort of what you see a lot, which Sam talked about, of a student who goes down to Guatemala for a week, has this great experiences, takes pictures of themselves with Black or brown people, and then puts them all on Facebook, and comes back and maybe continues with their business major and then ends up working for the companies that are enslaving those people in sweatshops or polluting the water systems and the soil down there. So I obviously didn't go that far, but I had this sort of experience of my relationship with the people that I encountered in Guatemala was only a week long, and I knew that I was probably never going to see them again, and it was a relationship that was pretty much based on pity and my desire to help and my desire to feel better about myself. So it was not authentic, and I want to reiterate what Sam said about entering into authentic relationship is probably the sort of first step and a huge root of how we can work for social justice. What I've discovered in the work that I've done, especially right now, working with low-income communities of color all the time at Waite House, is that people often ask me why I'm there, because I don't have to be there for my survival. I don't have to work with those communities because I could just totally go along with my existence and be okay without doing that kind of work. So I've had to talk a lot about myself and my own history and the systems that I'm a part of and the systems that oppress me or have oppressed me in the past in order to sort of explain the reason that I do this work. So I'm going to talk about St. Thomas a little bit. Does anyone know the founder of St. Thomas?
Archbishop Ireland.
Yep, Archbishop Ireland. So St. Thomas University was founded by Archbishop John Ireland. The statue that you probably see every day, that's him. And he was an immigrant, which might surprise you because we think of immigrants as being like that Mexican guy with the sombrero and the mustache, and not looking like that. You can probably guess that he was from Ireland. He was from Kilkenny. Is there anyone in here who's Irish?
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. So there's sort of like this still like living heritage of the Irish community at St. Thomas. My ancestors are from Ireland. My grandpa is from Limerick. My grandmother is from Clare, and my grandmother used to live at Crondelet Village, by the way. So
Solid.
yeah. So you can see this Irish heritage very clearly at St. Thomas. Our founder is an immigrant from Ireland. Think about the names of some of the things around here. We have Ireland Hall, Brady Hall, O'Shaughnessy Center, Finn Street, Center for Irish Studies. A lot of our community is based on Irish immigrants. We have buildings named after people from Ireland and all of that. So we don't really think of Ireland as being too exotic or oppressed, but if we go back to the time that Archbishop John Ireland was here working for our diocese, it was a time when Irish people were not really considered white. We were considered to be in the same class as Negroes or Native Americans. You see this sign that says no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. So there's just sort of like a really stark example of that history. Here's another sort of like faux scientific thing from the early 1900s about this. You see there's this Anglo-Teutonic person in the middle, which is sort of like the British white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. There's the Negro on one side, and then there's the Irish Iberian on the other side. So in our modern minds, we don't really think of a British person and an Irish person looking different. We think all white people really look the same, but because of this sort of like invented idea of race in the United States, because the United States really did invent race for economic reasons. It was a way for us to first kill Native Americans and take their land, second, enslave black people to grow us our food, and sort of now enslave the migrant populations to continue growing our food in very similar conditions to African American slaves. So here is giving you an idea of what Irish communities and people who were white and Irish were experiencing around the time of the founding of St. Thomas in the United States. Does anyone know why huge waves of Irish immigrants came to the United States in the mid-1800s?
The potato famine and
Yes.
lack of land available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's the potato famine and lack of land available, which is very similar reasons to why immigrants are still coming to the United States. Some Irish people will call the potato famine the Great Hunger. Some people call it the Great Genocide, because the situation at the time was not that it was just a bunch of Irish people who planted potatoes and that the potatoes failed and that they starved and had to come to the United States. Ireland was actually growing tons of food at that time. They had livestock, they had vegetables, they had fruits, they had cheese, milk, all that kind of stuff. But they were a colony of the British government, and the British government forced them to send every single food except potatoes to Britain for people to eat in England, and the people who were actually growing the food and working the land in Ireland were dying of starvation. Which is sort of a similar dynamic to what's happening right now with us and Mexico. Our corporations own a lot of the land in Mexico, and if you look at the grocery store, your tomatoes, your avocados, your onions, fruits, a lot of stuff comes from Mexico. But the people who are working the land and the people who are actually picking that food for us are the same people who are starving and needing to come here and steal our resources in order to survive. So there was a really interesting article recently in the New York Times called Paul Ryan's Irish Amnesia. Does everyone know who Paul Ryan is? Who's Paul Ryan?
He's a congressman representative from Wisconsin.
Yes, he's a congressman. He ran for vice president with Mitt Romney. in the last presidential election. So here is Paul Ryan, powerful man, white man, talks a lot about Irish heritage and how his grandparents came during the famine and lifted themselves up out of poverty and lived the American dream. But also is someone who is identifying with a lot of anti-poverty rhetoric. Here's a quote, not from Paul Ryan, but from his running mate Mitt Romney, about the 47% of people who were going to vote for Obama in that election, people who are dependent upon government, people who believe that they are victims, who believe they are entitled to healthcare, to food, to housing, people who pay no income tax. Here is a very similar quote from British nobles during the Irish potato famine, which Paul Ryan's ancestors had to flee, talking about how the British nobles were not going to give relief money or were not going to stop mandating that the Irish send them their food because dependence on charity is not an agreeable mode of life. So unfortunately, we see people like you and I forgetting our history, forgetting where we come from, and using our power to oppress other people instead of work with them and help fight for justice. I think there's one more. Yeah, here's another example about the Irish British nobles saying they're defective, selfish, and perverse, basically. It's their fault that they're starving to death because that's the way they are, and they're making choices that are getting them into poverty and then are forcing them to die. Here's another really controversial quote from Paul Ryan, talking about inner city men not even thinking about working or learning the value or culture of work, and therefore don't deserve any of our resources because it's their fault that they're in the situation that they're in. And obviously, as similar to the British nobles of saying of the Irish that it's their fault because that's their race and that's how they naturally are perverse and selfish and defective. Paul Ryan's quote about inner city men, when he said inner city, I'm pretty sure he meant black men. So it's a similar sort of language, just in a different time. So really unfortunate and something that I think we all need to think about as people who maybe are Irish ourselves, or at least we're all part of this institution which was built by Irish immigrants, have to think about when we work with communities, because we think it's very easy to feel very, very distanced from the people you're working with in Guatemala, or the people I'm working with in the Phillips neighborhood, or the people at Goodwill Easter Seals, but we're actually all held down by the same systems of oppression that still exist today. And here's a final image that I found that I thought was sort of telling. There's this white family up here in their big house saying, "Thanks, Jesus, for this food." There's this man saying in Spanish, "You're welcome," because I think that goes along with furthering this point of talking about oppression, or privilege, and how we're not just fortunate or blessed to be in the situation that we're in. There's systems that work really strategically to get us power and to get power away from other people. So here's this sort of symbol of that, of no, it's not just Jesus who's giving you fertile land, it's also people like this undocumented worker that are very, very, very separated and almost invisible to one another because of the racist systems that we live under. Yes.
I'm wondering, when you talk about, Paul Ryan and these people that you're quoting, they obviously have this way of thinking, and so I'm I'm assuming you also think this has pervaded our culture and that's the way we think. And do you think that's a product of ignorance or of racism or things? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Are we just not being told? We don't look where our food's coming from. Things like that.
Yeah. I think today it's a product of ignorance, because a lot of times people don't tell us this stuff, and we don't talk about it a lot. I think, but I think it comes from some really intentional, like political moves that have been made in history. There's a really interesting book that like really talks about this theme. It's called How the Irish Became White, and it basically talks about how the Irish started out as not a white population and a really underprivileged population, but in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, the Republican Party decided to start very actively recruiting Irish people to vote for them and to give money to them on the basis of segregation. So the Republican Party put out a lot of pamphlets about how dangerous blacks are and how Irish people are actually better than blacks, and like, look what you can have if you stop identifying with the blacks. So that's a huge part of why Irish Republicans exist today, is because we decided that we wanted some power and we should get away from those without power, and we could sort of like fit in with the powerful white elite, and that has obviously just like continued and continued. So it's both ignorance and some like very intentional historic choices. Yes?
So kind of following off of Sarah's question, this seems like a huge problem. I mean, it's an ideology. What are some practical ways, or what do you think practical ways we could do? What are things we could do to go about changing this?
I think talking about it is a huge thing. I also think, I mean, obviously like race is such a huge topic. So I think if, I'm assuming you're white, I think as a white person being like really aware of what privileges you have because you're white. There's an article that's really old by Peggy McIntosh called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of White Privilege, and it sort of goes through all of these things that list what advantages white people have, both like tangible and intangible in society. So I think awareness is a huge first step, because it just makes you live your life aware of what you have that other people don't because of white privilege. And then I think also building relationships outside of your comfort zone is a huge, 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 huge way to learn. I mean, we heard that from pretty much everyone, of just like talking with someone and understanding their reality and their story. It will teach you a lot about what other people's lived experience is and has been.
Thank you.
Really soon.
It's the final. It's the final.
Already?
I'll be there for your commencement speech though.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Emily. I'm a senior here at St. Thomas, and I'm a Justice and Peace Studies and Family Studies double major. So I have a bit of a confession to make. I was asked to come here and talk about my experience with poverty, and I can't do that. I can talk about my observations of poverty, and I can talk about observing people who have who experience poverty and like my interactions with those people, but because of my socioeconomic class and because of the education that I've been given, I can't talk about the experience of poverty.